Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Altman, back with the MindsetGo ICommunicate radio show, and I'm here with my partner in crime today, Melissa Glenny, the president of Franklin Staffing. And Melissa, thrilled to have you back on the show again. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
So Melissa and I are going to talk to you all today about, you ready for this, everyone? We're going to talk to you about R&R, but we're not talking about rest and relaxation in this case. We're talking about two of the biggest problems in corporate America, which is recruiting and retention. And Melissa, as not only owning an incredibly successful staffing company, but also being in the industry. How long have you been in the industry now, Melissa?
It's coming up on 20 years
20
this
years.
year. Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And Melissa, I guess I just want to start out and just ask you, what are you hearing? You know, everything I read right now is talking about companies are just scratching their heads, figuring out why they can't retain their employees, why people are jumping and not staying, and on the same token, how hard it is to attract great employees now with unemployment down so much. So what do you hear? Let's talk about the retention first. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think this is the first time that I've ever experienced something that's gone beyond the level of what I would call challenging. And I'm finding companies that are actually starting to hit the panic button.
Wow.
Because this is having an effect on productivity, not for, a period of time, a few months, they're struggling, then they kind of pull it all together. This is like one of those things where it's like, we're not pulling out of this. And the reason is we just are not pulling out of this. There are not enough people to fill the jobs, particularly the skilled jobs that need to be filled. So it's a war for talent to be able to compete.
So Melissa, I feel like so much has changed. And so from my perspective, when I work with leadership teams and executives, it used to be, how much money am I making? What are my health benefits? What are my vacation time? There would be a core 2 or 3 things that if you could meet people's needs in those areas, you're good. Mm-hmm. It's not like that anymore. What has changed, and what are you seeing? What do people, of course they want those things. That hasn't gone away. I mean, those are important factors. But what else are people really wanting now?
I think from both a recruiting and retention standpoint, I try to encourage clients to think in the context of people, going back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of reflect on that. And it really boils down to being able to speak to and meet the needs of people in their need for belonging, affirmation, and meaning. So, meaningful work, meaningful challenges, fulfillment, that's more important now than ever before. I think the emerging workforce, well, the millennials, I guess at this point we can stop calling that the emerging workforce. They've emerged.
Right.
But I really thank them for bringing that to the workforce where, it's not enough just to have the basic level of the financial security, the stability of a company, benefits covered, that's all fine and well. But, they've asked the question, well, what else? Is that it?
Well, and what you're talking about, Melissa, is when I think about certainly generational engagement, I mean, when you talk about what's at the heart of retention, it's engagement, right? It's getting people engaged in what they do. Mm-hmm. And when I think about what are those things, it's can you find purpose in what you're doing? Can you find, are you valued? Do you feel like you're a valued part of the team? Do you feel like you have a direct future and contribution to the success of the company? But I think the problem is for so many executives is a lot of that stuff feels nebulous. So it's not like money where I can say, okay, Melissa, I'm going to give you X dollars. You'll be happy, right? Well, when you talk about purpose and meaning and value and contribution, those are a little bit harder to do things and get that kind of return you're looking for. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you can't expect people to come and tell you that. So you've got to have a mechanism or a process, whatever it might be, that forces that along so you can get that understanding. We have, in my business, several years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, I created something where every 3 months we're checking in with employees, and it's a requirement that they're answering certain questions, and they're all pointed at, their desires beyond the job they're doing right now. So we can stay ahead of, what frustrations are, what they're enjoying, what they're not enjoying, what they want to do, the challenges they haven't. I think that many people are looking for meaningful challenges to stay engaged. I think that that's really fundamental to that.
Yeah, and I think what's funny about it is there's a little bit of a mindset out there that when and you mentioned millennials before, but millennials are often criticized for wanting to have meaning and purpose in their work or have some validation. And I think for a lot of older generation, that feels like they're having to be coddled, and like a special level of effort has to go into these people who want to find meaning and purpose in their work. But the fact of the matter is, we all should want to find meaning and purpose in our work. And to me, I don't see it as a negative. It's different because of just that. It's different than what people are used to as far as what they wanted out of their job.
And you do so much consulting with, business leaders, and I know you get to have these conversations with the employees where you're getting to, get a really strong understanding of what's on the hearts and minds of the employees and where they're at, the engagement wise. So, do you find that it's just the millennials that want this meaningful work and these challenges, or is it just that they're speaking up about it?
I think it's a great point, Melissa. I think it's twofold. I think it's definitely the millennials are way more outspoken about it. I think that's the first part. But I don't think it's just them. And what I think's happening is people want a voice, right? They want to be empowered to know their why. So if you're sitting in a meeting and that meeting becomes procedural, and every week you're going to this meeting and it really just becomes procedural, it stops mattering. It stops feeling, as opposed to being empowered and knowing what your role and contribution is in that meeting. If you're working on a project, it's the same thought process. So I think what it is people want a voice. They're not often given a voice. And I'm a big fan, you look at different perks people can get at a job. I'm a big fan of job shadowing because I feel like that gives people an opportunity to learn on their own goals and merits and have a voice in decision making. So I think it's twofold.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, the perception of these generational differences, I think it's just, the things that come to the surface more so than, true differences.
Yeah, I agree. So, Melissa, let me ask you this. I know we're both big fans of process, from a communication, from a structure, from an organizational point of view. I often, when I meet with some of these executives, I often ask them, how do you know, let's talk about recruiting for a moment. How do you know if your recruiting process is effective or successful? And they kind of give me a look, like sometimes I'll get an answer and they say, well, we have, the really sophisticated companies will tell me they have KPIs or metrics built. But most companies kind of look at me like I have two heads. A, what is your experience? And B, what do you tell them should be the metrics to know if they're effective?
That's a really interesting question because, that's one of the questions that I often start with when I'm talking with, a company for maybe the first time or early in the process. And, a lot of times the answer that I get when I say, well, how are things going with your recruitment? The answer is, they're going great. We got 300 resumes since we posted, this job. And so then, I say, well, so what? So great, you have 300 resumes to review. Now let's talk about the rest of the process. And worst case scenario, we end up sometimes talking with customers who will go through that process of reviewing. They might have some interviews and they end up with no offer, no hire. And so now we're like backing it up. So the goal, I try to frame things where they're looking at it like the goal is to do the least amount of work, review the least amount of resumes, and ultimately get to an effective hire more quickly.
Well, and you know what, Melissa, what I'm seeing is the recruiting, the number one recruiting mistake I make when people try to figure this problem out for themselves and they don't really have the knowledge or skill set to do so, is they don't really benchmark or measure the labor and time they invest in doing it. So when it comes to, okay, is it worth it to outsource a service like this? If they don't know the time and money that they're taking internally and having a recognition of that, they're not going to really get it.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
So from your perspective, well, let me say this to you. If I didn't work with you, if I didn't use your company to support my staffing needs, this is what I would do. Okay, so if I didn't work with a company like yours, if I needed to fill an executive position, my process would be I'd probably look at some job sites like Indeed or Monster's kind of outdated, but Indeed, LinkedIn, sites like that. I would get my resumes in, build a job description, wait for the resumes to come in and evaluate the resumes. But one of the questions I was anxious to ask you today is, I think evaluating resumes is an art form in itself. Mm-hmm. You can look for the keywords and do these resumes match my job description? But let's be honest, if anybody has any kind of savvy skills at all, they're going to build their resume or cover letter to match the job description so it looks like it's a fit.
Right.
So when we come back from the break, I would love for you to share, how do you evaluate resumes? What are you looking for as you're evaluating candidates? And companies put so much trust and confidence in you to find them what they're looking for. So when you come back, would you be willing to share your process?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, this has been Mindset Go Radio Show. I'm here with Melissa Glenny, and I'm Mark Altman. We'll be back. Welcome back. And Melissa, I purposely did that tease going into the break because I knew no one would dare stop listening knowing that you're about to reveal all your secrets. So anyways, take it away, Melissa. So we just for those of us just joining us, we're talking about resumes. And even to expand on that, Melissa, after we talk resumes, we'd love to talk about LinkedIn a little bit and the importance of that. So we're talking about what is it that people don't necessarily understand, and what is it that you do to read between the lines on a resume?
Well, you just started it off so perfectly, because I was just going to say the trick to reading a resume really well is reading in between the lines. So I look at what people are saying, but even more so what they're not saying, their word choices. I love to be able to pick up on, are they listing accomplishments, or are they listing their tasks? Are they, telling me any backstories, or even the tense, and kind of seeing if they are tracking with the tenses. It's amazing how many resumes I read, and they're saying 5 years ago they are doing X, Y, Z, and now they're saying they did do X, Y. So just attention to those details, things of that sort. Those are some of the finer nuances. But I think we're also really lucky today, where social media is just so all-consuming, right, in our world. So there's so much you can learn about people aside from what's on the paper, because anybody can come with an amazing resume. Somebody else could write it for them. We just don't know.
So, Melissa, that's actually a great point. And I talked a couple minutes ago about the process. And what I think about is, everybody's so sensitive about how they spend their time right now. And we talked about earlier about companies having a metric for the cost they have of time and money they spend on their own. But what might even be a bigger issue than that is companies, executives and HR people, this isn't the only thing they do.
Right.
So when you're trying to find a job, they don't have time to read between the lines. I mean, you're looking for keywords. You're looking for quick hit connecting points to say, yes, I want to talk to that person. No, I don't. Mm-hmm. So have you seen, when companies share your stories of when they've done it on their own, are you finding they're missing important details and steps because they're so time constrained with their other responsibilities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if a company has a big recruiting department and they've just structured it so that they handle things internally, then they're set up for having a strong process. But the reality is, a lot of businesses just don't have that built out, and so it's almost like recruiting in survival mode. Doing the bare minimum, catching the keywords, bringing people in for an interview or two. And there's so many other aspects to building out a really well-formed decision on making a hire. So, assessing soft skills, having conversations with candidates about what their desires are. I mean, our approach is really starting with candidates from that point, before we even talk about what their experience is. We're talking about where they want to go and why they want to go there. And I think that particularly gets missed in so many cases when you really just have to figure out, I have this hole, I need to plug it. Who can plug it? So it's a little short.
And Melissa, I think what we found is one of the commonalities we have in working together is how we're trying to turn the world on its ear with the assessment and evaluation approach.
Yeah.
And I've shared with you that I think first of all, when companies do assessments, assessments are only usually used when people are being hired. And even then, whatever that assessment exposes isn't even necessarily being followed up on. It's just being used for a hiring and firing decision. So, we work together to build a different approach to assessments to get a more ironclad approach to evaluating candidates. So if you wouldn't mind just chatting a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, what you have designed with the assessments in the comprehensive way that you've done it, I mean, it's just... It really has a way of exposing the whole iceberg and leaving a person with some really tangible, actionable information that they wouldn't otherwise have figured out about themselves, and certainly no one else would have figured out about the person. So I think that it's really remarkable, and it's really going to change the perspectives of a lot of people who are in hiring capacities. In a really powerful way.
Well, I got to tell you, Melissa, I can't hear the word iceberg. Does anybody hear the word iceberg and not think of Titanic? I don't even know how you could hear that without it. But and this is coming from a meeting we had earlier today where we heard the word hemphilope. And so I don't even know that I'll get that out of my mind for God knows how long. So Melissa, but I think what you and I really are bought into in this, and why we know this process works with the assessment, is because we're really coming at the human element. So in our assessment process, we're basically having employers, understand that when you put a job description, right, it's not just, hey, I need all these skills. There's a hierarchy of those skills. Right. There's a frequency of use and importance of those skills. So what have you found out that where your process has been so effective, what have you found out about that piece?
Yeah, it reminds me of somebody recently said something about, they wrote a letter and then ended with, sorry, it would have been shorter if I had more time. And I feel like that applies to what I see in job descriptions so much. They start out as a laundry list, and sometimes, unfortunately, they just stay as a laundry list. And there's not a lot of thought that goes into that deeper level.
That's a perfect analogy, Melissa, laundry list. It's perfect, a metaphor, perfect.
Yeah. So when we really dive in, the goal is to be able to shorten it by probably 75%. I mean, when we're talking about essentials, especially in a market where, there's not a lot of readily available talent that's, knocking at your door. So we really want to strike right at the heart of what's going to make somebody successful in a position, and they're going to be fulfilled in that position.
Well, Melissa, I think you're being humble. I mean, I got to tell you, one of the lessons I learned from you, and I'll never forget this, is I've probably done 200 job interviews over the years, and I can't tell you how many job interviews I've sat in as an executive and asked questions and listened to the answers and thought, okay, well, they would be good at this, they wouldn't be good at this, but I've never had priority or hierarchy around the specific list, that laundry list. So now when I go into an interview, I say, okay, it's one thing for someone not to be a perfect candidate. It's one thing to give someone an assessment and understand their strengths and weaknesses, but to really, truly understand by the assessment process where, and this is where I think we really have, and we've gotten the feedback we figured out, is we're trying to understand what people's self-awareness is around what competency level they have in a certain core competency or skill. We're trying to understand how passionate they are about doing that skill. And then we're figuring out, do you need to get better at it and why? And do you want to get better at it and why? And I think merging the answers to those questions with the process you've built about the organizational need and priority of those skills, I just think it's something I've never seen any other companies do.
I haven't either. I mean, and I can honestly say that in 20 years, I've seen a lot of really impressive assessments and packages, But the comprehensive 360-degree approach to establishing that, bullseye fit, I think that we've definitely struck on something that's powerful.
So, Melissa, I want to talk about a kind of a fun topic. It's kind of a disappointing topic, but it's a fun topic, and it's ghosting.
Oh.
We hear so much about ghosting. By the way, I didn't even know the term until about a year ago with my children educating me. They were talking about it one day, and I'm like, oh, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. So we hear about ghosting, and for those of you listening out there who aren't familiar with the term, don't feel bad, ghosting is when you reach out to someone and they don't respond to you. And frankly, this can happen in so many aspects of your life, right? It could happen in the dating worlds. It could happen in friendships, where you check in with someone, how you doing, and they never respond. I mean, think for a second how you feel when you text someone. How much time goes by when they don't respond to your text where you feel like you're being blown off? And by the way, let's face it, they might not be blowing you off. They probably aren't even blowing you off. But it's that feeling of being ignored.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in the recruiting and retention world, we've seen a very unusual trend develop, which was usually it was the employers ghosting the applicants because they're getting so many, and don't call us, we'll call you,
right.
Treating them like a number. But now the tide's turning a little bit, and now it's the applicants that are starting to ghost the employers because of where the job market is. What are you seeing? Are you seeing those trends? And what can we do about it, Melissa? I mean, are we stuck with this kind of insensitive attitude from both sides?
I think that you just made the critical point that for years, employers have been doing this to candidates. So, surprise, surprise, they're starting to get a taste of their own medicine.
Yeah.
This law of reciprocity, it holds true. So to your question, what can we do about it? I think that what we can do about it is change our behavior. Mm-hmm. We can't be ghosting people, first and foremost. And I think we're going to have to take that extra effort to engage and create a culture throughout the entire organization of engagement.
Melissa, are you able to, I think you're spot on, and are you able when you work with your clients, because that's such a big part of the core values of your company and how you treat people, are you able to help model that for companies? And is there a way to model that where they can kind of get the message that it takes two to tango? I mean, this is a multiple part process.
Mm-hmm. I think that, first of all, we start with a culture of effective recruiting where everybody is responsible for it. So, for a silly example, if you're going through line at a store and someone is just really remarkable, have a conversation with them right then and there. Like let that passion flow for your company.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And everybody needs to understand that that's an expectation, that you're going to be talking about your company, but they have to want to talk about it. And that's the job of the executives to make sure that that's the case.
Well, and I say it's a great idea because it's outside the box, right? It's outside the norm of what would be obvious to do. It's like, listen, if you meet a dynamic person or have an opportunity to have a great conversation, think bigger, right? Think outside the box. So. Right. All right, well, we're going to head into our next break. This has been Melissa Glenny, president of Franklin Staffing. I'm Mark Altman, founder and president of MindsetGo. And we will be back right after the break. Okay, welcome back to the show, everybody. Here with Melissa Glenny. I'm Mark Altman. And Melissa, we're talking about retention. And, want to revisit the conversation and just kind of touch upon some specific areas maybe companies have shared with you about why they think retention is an issue for them.
What I keep finding over and over is talking about that meaningful challenge that employers are looking for. And I think that one of the biggest challenges in retaining people is being able to feed them with development opportunities, and specifically the development opportunities that are most meaningful to them. Mm. So that actually leads me to a question, Mark. When I know you go into a lot of companies, and this is a key area where you're helping them, how do you uncover the training and development initiatives that will lead to better engagement and retention? And then what do you do with that?
Yes, well, I'm going to answer that question. We have a call, Melissa, so I'm going to answer that question in one moment, but we do have a call. So caller, welcome to the show. Glad to have you.
Hi, Mark. This is Alex.
Hi, Alex.
So I'm calling because you're speaking about development opportunities, and I'm working with a company that does a lot of internal training, but we're just not finding it very effective. It's not resonating with our employees. But outside training tends to be a little bit more expensive, and I'm just wondering how we should try to justify that outside training in terms of the value that it would bring to our organization.
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex, actually, and you've touched upon 2 or 3 different points. So first, let me just respond and say that a lot of times, it's that outside voice, right? For instance, a lot of the work we do with parents, they'll come to me and they say, they keep hearing the same thing from us, and they've stopped listening. We need you to come in and be that outside voice. So I think there's a little bit when companies rely on internal training. There's a few different challenges. One, it's the same voice over and over. 2, often that internal training can come from people who aren't necessarily qualified to train on the material. And let me discern what I'm actually talking about. I'm not talking necessarily about product knowledge. I'm talking about your ability to engage other people and understand what motivates and inspires other people to listen and learn. And I think that's a big strength for us as an outside trainer come in. Certainly we provide an outside voice, but I think we understand how to engage and inspire other human beings. And I think, frankly, what I always say to companies is that the way you can measure our training is that when the training is over, are people confident and comfortable to immediately apply what they just learned? And I think it's also, Alex, it's a standard, it's a different set of goals than you normally have on an internal training. As far as, go ahead. I'm sorry, Alex. Go ahead.
No, I would say it's a great metric to measure value added at the end of training, for sure.
Yeah, and as far as justifying the cost, because that's really an important question, I think a lot of times companies don't really understand what their options are as far as cost. I mean, you can get different training packages, but here's what matters. The cost is obviously a factor, but what matters is the continuous learning element. Because a lot of time companies will want to bring us in for a one-day training or a half-day training or a one-off training. And this is another mistake internal training happens. There is no continuous learning follow-up process to the training. So think about when we're in school, Alex. When we're in school, if you're in a junior year in junior year in high school and you take science, you're going to take that science class for the whole year with the goal of setting certain goals and expectations. When you do a 2-hour training, how much can you learn in a new skill and knowledge development in 2 hours? So one is the duration of the training, one is the frequency of the training, but it's what continuous learning. And by the way, from a cost perspective, it doesn't have to be paying out a company like MindsetGo. It could be MindsetGo coming in and doing a train the trainer model where we teach your executives and your leadership team on how to carry forward what they have had so far in training. So those are the best ways to approach it, Alex.
No, I agree. And Mark, what you touched upon with continuous learning, that has been a big pain center for us in terms of having the training first off resonate with our employees, but then also having it be sustained and having the change their mindset to incorporating those changes every single day and making it part of their habit. And so, how do you see MindsetGo's training model, leading into that continuous learning piece?
Yeah, so Alex, I mean, there's a bit of a communication algorithm here. I think what it comes down to is when you work with people, and I'm sure Melissa can attest to this as well, when you work with people, they have they're always coming from a different place, right? They have a different level of knowledge, they have a different level of skills, they have a different level of expertise. And so what it comes down to, I think when you typically lump people in a training, you lose a set of people right out of the gate because you could be working with them on certain areas that they sit there and they say, well, I already know that. I've already done that. I've already tried that. And so I think our algorithm is really taking the perception factors then when people come into a training, whether they're forced to a training because a company says you need this, whether they're voluntarily coming into a training but they're coming from a different place. We really evaluate those that when we teach and when we experience and engage other human beings, we take those factors into consideration to truly maximize the value around that. Did that answer your question, Alex? I'm not sure if I totally answered your question.
No, you definitely did answer both of my questions. Thank
Okay.
you so much, Mark.
Well, thank you for calling, and certainly if you're interested in bringing us in for training, you certainly can go on our website and reach us. But really appreciate the call. Please call again.
Of course, yes. Thank you, Mark.
Yep, you're welcome. So, Melissa, I know you had a question for me, but I want to ask you something. So, so much of, I think, effective recruiting is not treating people like a number. And I take a lot of pride in that at MindsetGo. And so what is it in your process when you're working with companies, when you're working with both sides, you're working with candidates and companies, how do you push the point across and reinforce for companies the importance of doing that? And what do you specifically do to make people feel important?
When we, anytime we start out with a conversation with somebody for the first time, the very first question is, as you evaluate new opportunities for yourself, what ranks most highly? What's most important for you in terms of considerations? And, it's interesting because a lot of people will ask me, what do you mean? How do you want me to answer that? And I want them to answer it however it comes to their mind.
Right.
So, sometimes it's, salary or location and things of that sort. But a lot of times, if we keep digging and peel the onion away, and ask them about, how's the relationship that you have with your boss, and what was the best relationship you ever had with your with a boss, and really keep diving in, and then circle back around and confirm. Okay, so the most important things for you are X, Y, Z. It's really interesting to see how people go through that process and like, oh, well, okay, yeah, I thought it was salary and location, and I thought they're answering in the way that they think we're expecting them to answer. But when they come back around, it's really an insightful conversation, not only for us, but for them,
See, I think that's such a critical point, Melissa, because I think so many people go into the interview process thinking they have to answer, expecting the way people want to answer. But you just made me realize something I had never thought of, which I think is such an integral part of what you do, is that self-awareness factor. So I have to ask you, when you sit in front of that executive for the first time, and you go through your process and start asking questions to learn more about them and their needs and so on and so forth, when you ask questions about what their current process is and what their goals and objectives are, what their KPIs, if they don't really know and they don't really have a process, what goes to your mind in that moment? Do you immediately assume like, oh my God, these guys don't really know what they're doing? Like what becomes your thought process in those cases?
Yeah. It just, to me, that's like, okay, so now I understand where we're starting, and we're going to maybe have a little more work than I thought we did, which is fine. People have so much on their plates, and there's just so much that they're having to pay attention to all the time. So, I'm totally, I get it, and I'm totally fine to just start wherever somebody's at and kind of take them through the process. In building my own business in almost 8 years now, I've been at all of these stages. So I feel like I can, there's a lot of stages hopefully still left to go through, but, I feel like that's okay. It's actually kind of fun, I think, to go through the process to help someone go from, point A to B to C to D. So we kind of just merge in wherever they're at.
So, Melissa, do you find most clients come to you reactively or proactively?
Oh, reactively.
Because they've just had a bad hiring experience or something, and that you're coming in to save the day, so to speak?
Yeah, it's always, I ask the question when we are wrapping up, the assessment process and what they're looking for. I say, okay, so what's your target date to fill? And the answer is typically, I was really hoping to have it filled last week. So tomorrow.
That's reactive.
Yeah. So we're getting the call because they're already at the point where this is unbearable. I meant to have it done already. Reactive is in all capital letters.
Fantastic. All right, well, we will be back for our final segment. This is the Mindset Go radio show here with Melissa Glenny and Franklin Staffing, and I'm Mark Altman. We'll be right back. All right, we're back talking about R&R. Again, not rest and relaxation, but retention and recruiting.
Well, you know what, Mark? Actually, if you don't mind me interjecting, because I had a burning question when you were talking with the caller, Alex, earlier. She asked you some good questions, and I was reflecting back on trainings that I've gone through in my career. And I feel like so many times, we would go to trainings, even 3-4 day long trainings, and then we'd come back all, revved up and ready to, implement this. And then within a week to 2 weeks, maybe, tops, it's all gone. And we're back to our old habits. And so, it makes me curious. In your work, do you find, how do you make the training stick? Is it possible in a one session to make it, inject that stickiness to it so people carry it forward? Is there a critical element of it? How does that work?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So there's two different approaches I take. Such a big part of our training is problem solving real situations for the company that they all face and in the industry. With that said, if it's a 2-hour or a half day or a one-off training, my approach is more to build around solving specific problems they have because they're looking for ROI, right? So they're looking for tangible deliverables. So can you shift mindsets? Can you get habits replaced and behaviors changed in 2 and 4 hours? Probably not. If someone said to me, hey, here's the problem, I can do this, can you do this in 2 hours? I'd say, no, I can't. If I can solve specific problems that you're trying to solve, I can do that. But remember, one of the big aspects that I try to do in training so you can make training stick, and one of the best ways to do it, Melissa, is to develop critical thinking skills. So we try to build processes for people, but not by me telling them what the right answers are. I will eventually confirm what the right answers are. But the idea is if someone says, so I have this problem from an emotional intelligence perspective, I have this problem. One of the other department heads, every time I go to him with a problem, he flips out, he gets frustrated or whatever happens. So I'll say, well, give me an example. And then we can role play and act out the example and what were the best practices and how to solve the problem. But what I'm ultimately trying to do is not just solve that specific problem. I'm trying to give them the template or the best practices to solve any kind of problem like it by the end of that training. And I think I'll tell you a very brief anecdote, Melissa. I once went into a bank to do a sales presentation. And one of the questions the bank manager said to me, she pulled out this huge manual from a previous training they had done. She goes, do you provide after the training a big manual like this? And I said, I sure don't. I said, because when's the last time you've opened that manual? No one looks at that stuff. It's not user-friendly. So a lot of the tools and resources we try to design, whether we come back or not, are so user-friendly that they say, okay, well, when these situations come up, I'll just take a look at this card or this one-page Word document with a template and with a protocol. It's, oh, right, those are the things I'm supposed to think about. And I'll tell you, Melissa, final thought on this, the biggest thing I'm going to do in short-term and long-term training is mindfulness. Because if you really want to change a behavior or a habit or an attitude, it all comes out to identifying and recognizing you have the deficiency or problem in the first place. So that is a big key in getting people to be mindful and self-aware and what the root cause of why they have this problem in the first place. So those are the different things we do to address that.
I love what you said about the manual. And it's funny because I've had employees who are really eager to have a manual that addresses any potential situation they might run into and feel like this is something, I would be so much better at my job if I had a manual I can flip to the page. And I think that your point is just so spot on that it isn't about having all the answers. It's about being able to formulate the answer. Exactly.
So yeah, no, that was a great question. So Melissa, in our final few minutes, I guess I really would like to try to understand, and by the way, Melissa and I are going to be doing an upcoming panel discussion, and I'd have to confirm the date, but by the end of the show I will confirm. Do you know?
June 19th.
June 19th.
Yep.
Okay, June 19th. It's actually at O'Neill Cinemas in Littleton, and by the way, it's a brand new movie theater, and just a shout out to O'Neill Cinemas. It's a movie theater like I have never seen. It's got all the state-of-the-art sound and movie theater experience, but it's got a full dining menu. It's like a restaurant. It's got a sports bar with a big screen TV. I mean, so think of the comfy seats and the new wave of movie theaters and exponentially multiply that and think of an actual night out experience. And that's what O'Neill Cinemas is. So please join us on June 19th. I think it's 9 to 11, Melissa, or something along those lines?
9 to 11:30, yep.
Okay, so 9 to 11:30. I better get more up on my details.
That's all right.
I know someone's going to yell at me after the show for that. And so in any event, please join us. And we're going to have some other guests on the panel talking about HR situations and benefits and things like that. So please join us. So Melissa, final thoughts in the show today. What are some keys you think at the end of the day when it comes to how can companies best utilize your services? They reach out to you and they say, we need your help. We don't exactly know what we need. How do you guide them on the best way to utilize what you do at Franklin Staffing?
So when we'll go through a consultation and figure out, what pieces are going to be most impactful for them. I think that the best advice I could give for anyone working with, any kind of advisor in recruitment, retention, and things of that sort is to, I got to go to the mindset, being willing to shift their mindsets, because sometimes what I find is that they have some kind of rooted thinking and about the way that they want to go about doing things, and we uncover the roadblocks in their processes and why they keep turning over a position every 6 months. And so as we diagnose that, I think one of the hardest things for us to overcome sometimes is the resistance to changing what they're doing, and like actually getting them to believe that if you don't change something, you will experience the same thing again. So I think that that's really fundamental. I mean, the rest of it is pretty tactical, and we have that in our toolbox. We give that to our clients, so that part is easy. The willingness to try new things and really open their mind. That if we can get that in place, then we're good to go.
Well, it's funny, Melissa, we're talking so much about retention and recruiting today, and I once had someone share this expression with me, and they said, when it comes to developing your team and training, giving them the tools they need, there's a lot of companies, training companies like MindsetGo will say, well, you better do it because what happens if they leave? And this guy said, no, it's the opposite. What happens if they stay?
Yeah.
And so I think that was something that really stuck. And, for you, Melissa, I think that often we both have similar challenges where people make assumptions about cost and value and whatever. But I think that when you talk about fear of change, look, that fear of change, the fear of the unknown is tough. Never hurts to have a conversation. So if you think you have a need, if you even 20% think that someone like Melissa could have an initial, no strings discussion to just see if there's value for your organization, it's a no-brainer. I mean, this isn't even a sales pitch, everybody. It's a no-brainer. If anything, you'll learn something out of it, right? Mm-hmm. There's no downside. All right. And so, Melissa, for you, I guess a final question is I'd like to talk a little bit about core values before we leave the show. Mm-hmm. What do you think are some of the core values in your organization that have so much resonated with the clients you work with and that have really driven your success?
I think that, one thing that is just fundamental. Well, first of all, let me back up and say that I am a believer that you, by and large, can't or should not look at hiring people and then training them on your values. At lower levels in an organization, you can do that. But, in our business and particularly in businesses where, you're hiring at mid or higher levels, it's really critical to hire people who have the values that you have. So what cuts through and through with the people in my company is that we just genuinely care about our customer, and that is what drives us first and foremost. I've thought, we need to kind of balance things out because we're awfully centric on the customers we have, and we should be focusing on developing new customers. But I think that I'm okay with the fact that we just care so heavily that that is it's just a genuine place that we're coming from. And in follow up to that, I think that creativity and this rigorous solution finding that's born out of the fact that we care so deeply. I think that that's what's contributed in the most part to the success that we've been able to create.
So Melissa, I'm just really kind of sitting here blown away a little bit because I've never thought of the concept. Like you can't like, why would you try to train people on the core values? You would want to make sure they have the core values walking in the door. And that is, I mean, you talk about, that's not on a job description.
Right.
You know, that's not in a rec or a resume or whatever. So that to me, Melissa, what a great way to end the show. Talk about reading between the lines. That is a prime example of what you were talking about earlier between reading between the lines. And I mean, that's huge. I mean, that's culture, that's environment, that's communication style. I mean, that's big.
And I think that's why the assessments that you've developed that really uncover people's core values is so important for people to be utilizing.
Great point. So, all right, Melissa Glenny, thank you so much for joining us again today. Franklin Staffing. A big shout out to my mentor, Ted, and the producer of the show. He rocks. And this has been the Mindset Go radio show. We'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Go Bruins!